West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
In my judgment, the Department of Justice has been politicized to the greatest extent I've ever seen in this country.
I also want to at least respond to your characterization of the department, which sure. I vigorously disagree with. I believe the men and women of the department pursue their work every single day in a nonpartisan and an appropriate
General
way.
Garland.
Attorney General Merrick Garland spent 4 hours testifying before the Senate today, parrying Senator Ted Cruz, you saw there in that moment, detailing the DOJ's work and showing his calm demeanor in a period that is really anything but calm or really normal for the Justice Department. 2 special counsel probes involving the current and former president. News about the DOJ now subpoenaing Mike Pence and Mark Meadows in the ongoing insurrection probe. Congress has also famously asked the DOJ to consider indicting Donald Trump and several aides in what they call a criminal conspiracy to overthrow the government. And the DOJ continues its charges and trials for people who were on site during that. Over 500 convictions there. Now, Garland, like many DOJ leaders, does not say much more than he has to. That's often the case with his spokespersons at DOJ as well, which makes for a potentially interesting interview right now because Anthony Coley just recently left his post as senior advisor to Attorney General Garland and public affairs director for DOJ. You might see him there in that photo. And this is his Beat debut. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
We've talked sometimes, but not on television, so I'm glad to have you.
We have talked sometimes, and I think, I will not say they were arguments, but they were animated conversations.
Animated. We'll take animated. That sounds like one of those, what's that word? A euphemism. But appreciate you coming in.
Thank you for having me.
We'll get to the hearing. Yep. One of the things that was brought up there, but I want to start, as we try to do around here, with the alleged facts, is the Washington Post report here. Yeah. Pushed back by the FBI, allegedly, on the road to the Mar-a-Lago raid. FBI officials, the Post reports, who would be in charge of leading that search, resisted the plan. They thought it was, quote, too combative and proposed instead to seek Trump's permission to search his property. You deal with stories like this all the time. Number one, should it be concerning that the FBI seemed to be pushing back to try to help the person who might be, in this case, lawfully searched? And two, you see a headline like this, is this story mostly right, or does it get it wrong in your view?
So thank you for this. I want to be careful on this one particular story because I was at DOJ at the time, and I'm familiar with some of the purported facts in the story. What I will say, generally speaking, is that there are often candid conversations that investigators and prosecutors have in the course of any investigation. The important thing is that the way forward for any case is to make sure that that case is treated the same way that similar prior cases have been treated.
Well, let's get into that because I think it is based on the reporting true that the search ultimately went forward. Magistrate judge approved it. I think people have heard about that. But also, again, reading from the same report, agents at the FBI, quote, were afraid that taking aggressive steps investigating Trump could blemish or end their careers. Now, just straight talk without you revealing any secrets. You read that and you think, well, I guess it works. I guess Donald Trump scares people in government and it works.
So two things. Under Merrick Garland, and I have seen him do this countless times behind the scenes, he pursues justice without fear or favor. And he's going to continue to do that based on my knowledge of him and the people that he has around him.
Are people in the FBI afraid of Trump?
I will say very broadly, again, I don't want to talk about an ongoing investigation, but I will say when I was at the Justice Department, there were a number of stories like this that would pop early in the morning. And I will say broadly, some of those stories, and this goes to your earlier question, some of those stories were broadly right that had some minimal inaccuracies. And some of those stories were broadly wrong and had some minimal things that were right. This was a part of my frustration, if you will, in working at the Justice Department, because there were certain times when we actually could correct a record. I remember in the first week of August, there was a news report that said that Merrick Garland did not know about the FBI search of Mar-a-Lago. That, of course, was wrong. The Attorney General himself said that some days after the search. And, the Washington Post in its story today actually confirms that. But then there were a number of other times when, for a variety of reasons, grand jury rules in particular, where I could not engage on stories. And I'll give you an example. So if an MSNBC reporter came into my office and said, Coley, I am prepared to report the following. It's concerning a grand jury. I had to stop them there.
Right, you can't even get into it.
And you know this as a lawyer. We can't even confirm the
existence of
a grand jury.
Well,
this is the issue that we have, though. There is a delta, there is a gap between what the Justice Department is doing and what the public thinks it's doing.
No, I think that's fair. And I think for those of us who care about this, I know our viewers care, we care here in the newsroom, keeping in mind that, there may be a lot that's submerged underwater and for good reason. I mean, the whole country saw the grand juror speak out in Georgia, totally different jurisdiction.
Right.
But people go, getting a lot of extra information in real time might not even be the right alternative.
Right.
Let's go to today's hearing.
Yeah, great.
Have you heard of Lollapalooza?
Yeah, I have. Yeah.
Some people look at Garland DOJ and they're like, it's special counsel palooza. It's like, you want one, you get one. Serious issues, but I say that with some fun. But Senator Durbin, who's not a big Garland critic, he's Democratic chair of the committee, but he asked about a little bit of that. Let's look at that exchange.
You have authorized special counsel to investigate the classified materials, both at President Biden's home as well as former President Trump's home. Could you explain why you did that?
With respect to President Trump, he had announced that he was a candidate for president, and President Biden had indicated that he would be a candidate. I thought that's an extraordinary circumstance.
Let's dig into this. Yeah. If that's the standard, then it could mean a lot of special counsels. How do you explain to the public why your former boss this administration uses more special counsels than in the past? And just to throw another at you, Mike Pence is very close to potentially running for president. He's on his media tours. We have a look at this. If you compare Trump and Biden here, they got special counsels. If Pence announces by that standard, then he's got to get one too, right?
So thank you for the opportunity to talk about this, because I think the main objective that Merrick Garland had going into this hearing is to communicate his unwavering commitment to do justice. And what do I mean by that, Ari? I mean doing the right thing, the right way, for the right reason over and over and over again. The other point that I want to make, and I get specifically to your point, is that you saw him today talk a lot about the rule of law. And that's important in dissecting your questions. For Merrick Garland, the rule of law is not some abstract set of jumble of words. It is the underpinning of our democracy, and it means at its core, treating like cases alike.
So
you don't have one.
So does Pence get one?
Well, number one, I'm not going to play this out on air, but it is important to note that Donald Trump has announced that he is running for president, and Joe Biden has announced his intent to run for president. So I think the appointment of the special counsel, as the Attorney General said at the time, is that these are extraordinary circumstances. And a part of what he needs to do is not just do justice, but he has to appear to do justice. Well, and the people have to believe that he's doing justice.
Right. And I mean, we're talking about how to do it. I don't think there's been, I haven't seen a suggestion that he's trying to bury any evidence or anything like that. We're talking about, though, the fact that he's doing it a little different. The Pence example raises that because you say, how many special counsels are going to be? Since you're here, I want to give you the chance. You might be in your office. You might be watching and go, oh, there they go again. Well, now you're here. So I'm going to play, including some criticism of some of this, of your former boss, Attorney General Garland. Let's take a look.
Great.
I think the Department of Justice can do both of these investigations with the men and women who have worked there for years and with integrity.
I disagree pretty strongly with the decision by Attorney General Garland to seek a special counsel. I don't think it's needed under the regulations, and I think it risks delaying this investigation needlessly.
I have an idea. Merrick Garland should appoint a special prosecutor to become the Attorney General of the United States. Because apparently Merrick Garland can't do the job. And that is not me saying it. That is Merrick Garland saying it.
You get the benefit of responding.
So thank you for the opportunity to do that. These are extraordinary circumstances and extraordinary times. And I think what we saw Merrick Garland do with the appointment of these special counsels is do justice, do things the right way. In his view, he believes that that there isn't an option. And this is just one of those matters where smart people are just going to have to disagree. And I respect all of the people that you just saw. But at the end of the day, doing justice is, in his view, doing the right thing, the right way for the right reason.
No, and disagreement's part of the law.
That's exactly right.
Let me draw you to the Jan 6 probe, where the DOJ has had, and we've shown, aggressive cases, sedition convictions. There's that whole record. But then on the special counsel, which we just mentioned, on the actual now special counsel part, they seem behind the Congress. We could show you, for example, Mark Meadows. It was a year and 4 months after the House went to him that this DOJ apparently, reportedly, you can correct me if we're off, went to subpoena him. Jared and Ivanka, about 10 plus months after the House, we learned last week they're pursuing them. You were there. I don't think I'm asking for grand jury material. Have they been late at times?
All right, so this sounds like one of the private conversations that we had when I was at DOJ.
Well, let's make it public.
I mean, the fact of the matter is that the public does not know all of the things that the Justice Department is doing. That is appropriate. And that's how the process should work. What I can guarantee to the American people, and from what I saw as my 2 years at the Justice Department, is that this is a process that is filled with integrity. And that's what I think everyone should want.
And again, without releasing what's secret, if someone says, or we showed Ellie Mistal says, oh, they're punting, they're behind, they don't care, you say what to that?
So here's what my view is of Jack Smith. I think, according to the regs, he is not subject to the day-to-day supervision of any person at the Justice Department.
It is Thursday, the 2nd of March of 2023, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English Bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef. And our daily special is Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. A little bit of jambalaya. A little bit of spice in your life. That's right. And we got the pineapple rice already here, too, just as a side dish in case. All right. Not everybody's into the grits, but we got what you need. May not be what you want. That's right. We live now in the age of imposed need. We'll tell you what you need, and you're going to like it or else. Welcome to America. Jeez. You know, it is the land of choice. You either do or you don't. And if you don't, well, that's the end of you. Wow. How far we've slipped in such short a time in comparison to, well, I don't know, the universe. Jeez. All right, what is time when you're confronted with that immensity? I remember thinking that as a kid, and I thought very quickly, you know what? I am not adept at being able to handle that. I don't want to turn into the Sal Mineo character in Rebel Without a Cause. Remember when they went to the Griffith Observatory and they were seeing that the expanding universe was going to at some point contract and then everything was going to blow up, and it freaked Sal Mineo out so bad? Yeah, you don't want to let that happen to you. You know, it's sort of like reading the Talmud before you're 12. You're not supposed to do that. Some of us learn the hard way. Anyway, how did we get there? Well, we always get there. This is West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, all right? That's right. You know, before the humanities were called the humanities, guess what they were called? Yeah, that's right, liberal studies. And liberal then, even then, was beginning to have, it was being used as a pejorative. You're a liberal? So they turned it to the humanities. Now, some may take issue with how that came about, but I would suggest that, just look at the progression of how liberal studies was sort of phased out at a particular time, and we might call that the Civil Rights Movement. Isn't that weird? Mm-hmm. And maybe even earlier because of the New Deal. Maybe. Well, here we are now. All those Nazis that were trying to take over back in the 40s. Jeez. I have to say that living in a household where your dad was a university professor of some renown and there were books galore, we used to just talk at the dinner table about that particular incident, and, Prescott Bush got bandied about a little bit back in the day. Mm-hmm. Look it up. Jeez. Anyway, we're that close. That close, and, but we were able to root them out. And I think we need to do it again, because there is some really brazen behaviors by the, I would call them criminals. that grilling that Garland got yesterday, I have to say that I am looking at Garland in somewhat of a more sympathetic light. I do remember bringing up quite a while ago when some of these conjectures about Garland not, being up to snuff. I had actually conjectured right here on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy that I think there was some internal struggles, and I was thinking FBI and DOJ as being in somewhat the same entity. But we might as well call the FBI the cops and DOJ the prosecutors. Law and order. All right. So, now we know who Garland is. That's right. Anyway, there's an internal struggle, and I've conjectured, and it seems to be rightfully so, is that there were some Trump holdovers. People who decided, I don't know, upon their own volition to tank Hillary Clinton's campaign in the waning days before the election. And there was nothing there. As opposed to what we do know about Donald Trump. And have known about Donald Trump for some considerable time. I mean, my God, he and his dad had to pay the largest HUD violation in federal history. Of course, I don't know, maybe HUD hadn't been around that long. There's only about a bunch of black people, and who cares about them? Maybe that has something to do with it. I don't know. What I do know is that in spite of the Ron DeSantis fascist attitude about history, there was systemic racism. My God, what do you think slavery is? And now we have child labor. Just an extension of it. A contract is a contract. Somebody should be able to sign a contract to work for no money. Really? Well, in our society, that is not a contract. And a kid certainly cannot sign a contract. And there's no way anyone's going to convince me that a 13-year-old looks like a 30-year-old. Oh, well, he had pineapple cows. Yeah, that's why they look like they were 35 years old. A 13-year-old, give me a break. Even with all their sort of gear on, to be able to clean, the meat packing plant so you don't get splattered with all the meat packing bits. I could tell they were little kids. Give me a break. And I love how everybody's like, well, not everybody, but the pundits, the conjecture out there. Where do the kids come from? Got to be some sort of like coyotes, traffickers bringing them in. Yeah, maybe check out the DeVosses. Jeez. It's just me. But the other part that peeves me are the companies who hire these kids, and that's why I was going off about there's no way anybody's going to convince me a 13-year-old looks like a 30 to 35-year-old. Give me a break. Jeez. Even like when, like junior high school kids are starting to get hair on their faces. It's not like stubble, okay? I'm just saying. You can tell. Jeez. And they're not going to go after the businesses because how would they know? They were the victims of the fraud. Really? Well, I actually believe there are some elements within the DOJ that said, no. We're going to find out what happened here. We're not going to sweep it under the rug, I hope. But how many kids went missing when they were separated from their parents at the border, and where are they now? Some working in that big house, some working in the fields. I wonder. I sometimes wonder. And I wonder that maybe they should start with the DeVosses, because she was up to her neck in this kind of trafficking, adoptions. Yeah. Sounded banana Republican to me. That's exactly what Pete O'Shea and others in that realm, the students who became generals and dictators in Latin American countries who went to what was known as the School of the Americas, where they were taught to be, petty tyrants and how to get away with it for a while. Because after a while, we like to rein our petty tyrants in and get rid of them. Yeah, just look what happened to DM. Remember that guy? Yeah, hardly any do. What? Yeah, tired of his ass. Goodbye. Okay, so we're going to go back to those days again. Jesus. They're already talking about outlawing the Democratic Party in Florida. What are you going to do? Drop them from helicopters? That's exactly what they have in mind. We're talking retribution. We want our safe spaces. You had a safe space and still continue to have a safe space now. Biatch. God, these unrepentant bigots. And I guess we're going to let them get away with it because they're just so brazen. How do you stand up against the brazenness? Well, I have my strategies. Not everyone considers them to be the most diplomatic. But, it's not like I'm flying off the handle anymore. I actually ponder whether I want to be a total dick or not. And oftentimes I'm not a total dick. So imagine what it could be like. Yeah, just imagine. Anyway, we do have a curated show as we wind down the week. Oh, my gosh. Well, starting off at the top, of course, that was Garland getting grilled and some other news out there, too. So, I guess we're going to have to find out what Jack Smith has to say. And once again, don't keep your hopes up too high. On the rest of the menu, Starbucks committed egregious and widespread violations of federal labor law while trying to halt union campaigns. Union busting. A Fox News-saturated red California county has dumped its Dominion voting machines, and they haven't heard what's going on, not one whit. And Robert Kennedy assassin Sirhan was denied parole for the 16th time. And in this reporter's opinion, good. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where Hyundai was poised to become Tesla's top contender. Then the U.S. government blindsided it. And Britain's Royal Navy seized Iranian weapons, including anti-tank guided missiles, from a smuggler's vessel in international waters in the Gulf of Oman. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. At netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Busy as she may be, she's there. So thank you so much, Kelly, for everything that you do. If you would then look across the page to the left from that chat room link near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, all the way over there is the link to our Patreon page, and if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, it really does help, especially now since we incurred some, well, shall we say, sizable bills in the form of new hardware and its attendant software, and none of it comes cheap. No. But your generosity has allowed us to continue this powerhouse of resistance. That's it, right. So, and I want to give a shout out to those of you who have become recent recurring Patreons of Netroots Radio. Thank you so much. Your help is helping us fulfill our civic duty as the founders originally intended so many years ago. All kidding aside, thank you all. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, Mastodon, and Spoutable, do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that, and he's pretty darn busy too, so thanks, Tom. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam, and also on Mastodon and Spoutable at Justice Putnam. I incidentally post the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's 10 minutes before showtime, so you could just go there, but you can find those links generally on the Mastodon, Twitter, Spoutable, social media platforms. So there. And, of course, as a reminder, the show notes and links is where you can find the actual articles in which we are, well, deriving our little salon meme here at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. You can find them there. You can also follow the show on Twitter, and I'll get accounts on Mastodon and Spoutable, maybe on the weekend, maybe not. But anyway, follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West, and please do pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever podcasts can be found. And they're found everywhere. Okay, this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe is by Jacob Bogaj from the Washington Post. And I don't know if that's how you spell your name, Jacob, but here we are. Starbucks committed egregious and widespread violations of federal labor law while trying to halt union campaigns, like union busting. And that was a ruling by a federal administrative law judge who ordered the coffee giant to reopen closed stores, reimburse back pay and damages to employees who launched a nationwide organizing drive at the company. Starbucks showed a general disregard for employees' fundamental rights, Judge Michael Rosas wrote in a 220-page order that was released yesterday, Wednesday. In resolving an extensive case that combined 33 unfair labor practices, and these were from 21 stores in the Buffalo area, Rosas held that the company retaliated against employees affiliated with Starbucks Workers United as they began a union drive in 2021. Since then, 268 of the roughly 9,000 company-owned U.S. stores have voted to unionize, and Starbucks interim chief executive Howard Schultz has drawn the ire of liberal political leaders. Sanders said Wednesday, that was Bernie, that he would force a vote to subpoena Schultz as part of a hearing about unionization efforts at Starbucks. Now, Rosas's order requires Starbucks to halt a sweeping list of behaviors that include retaliating against employees for unionizing, promising improved pay and benefits if workers renounce the union, surveilling union-supporting employees while on site, refusing to hire prospective employees who back the union, and relocating union organizers to new stores to halt the group's activity and overstaffing stores ahead of union votes. Starbucks, the judge said, must reopen stores it closed as union momentum swelled among workers, rescind dozens of disciplinary actions taken against Buffalo area employees, pay reasonable consequential damages, and offer to reinstate terminated workers to their jobs. Rosas's order also calls for Schultz and Denise Nelson, the company's senior vice president of U.S. operations, to read a 14-page notice that explains workers' rights and how the company violated the law. Jessica Garrison, also of the Washington Post, brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. Swept up in unproven voter fraud claims, the Shasta County Board of Supervisors has upended the county's election process, canceling its contract with Dominion Voting Systems and opting this week to pursue, among other options, the possibility of counting votes by hand. Supervisor Kevin Cry, part of a newly empowered hard right majority on the board, also announced at Tuesday's board meeting that he had been in touch with My Pillow chief executive Mike Lindell, a prominent pro-Donald Trump election conspiracy theorist, about supporting a pilot voting system in the rural Northern California county. On the same day, in another Republican-controlled county 400 miles south, Kern County supervisors narrowly voted to keep Dominion as the county's voting system, but not before listening to hours of testimony from residents who were convinced the system was rigged. Dominion is one of the largest suppliers of voting machines and software in the U.S. and currently runs voting machines in 41 of California's 58 counties. After Trump lost the election in 2020, his supporters spent months propagating baseless conspiracy theories about Dominion, including false accusations that the company's machines were used to throw votes from Trump to Biden, and that Dominion, a company based in Colorado, was a corrupt tool with ties to the Venezuelan government, even dead dictators. Those allegations were given heavy airing in right-wing media, including Fox News. The actions in California's halls of government come as Dominion is waging a vigorous legal battle against Fox, alleging that the network's top leaders knew the claims of voter fraud in the 2020 election were false, but gave Trump's lawyers and other election deniers a high-profile forum to spread their unfounded claims because it was good for ratings. Dominion is seeking $1.6 billion in damages. Dominion has also sued Lindell for defamation after he spent millions advertising election denialism alongside his pillows. In an interview yesterday, Wednesday, from an airplane on descent into Washington, D.C., Lindell said he was pretty proud of Shasta. Every county should do that, he said. I think that they're leading the way in California. In a statement, Dominion said Shasta's county's decision was yet another example of how lies about Dominion have damaged our company and diminished the public's faith in elections. O'Brien and Sharon Bernstein of Reuters brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A California review board yesterday, Wednesday, denied parole to Sirhan Sirhan, the Palestinian refugee serving a life sentence for assassinating U.S. presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy in 1968. Sirhan was denied parole for another 3 years by a panel of California parole board members who said he was not suitable for release. The decision marks a change from a different panel's conclusion 2 years ago that the 78-year-old should be paroled. That decision was overruled by California Governor Gavin Newsom, a Democrat, and Sirhan sued, saying the governor's action was illegal. It was not immediately clear what impact yesterday's ruling would have on the lawsuit. Sirhan was convicted of gunning down Kennedy, age 42, in the kitchen pantry of the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles on June 5th of 1968. The shooting occurred minutes after the U.S. Senator and former U.S. Attorney General gave his victory speech after winning the California Democratic presidential primary. Kennedy died the next day. Sirhan has said he had no recollection of the killing of Robert Kennedy, although he also said he fired at Kennedy because he was enraged by his support for Israel. Kennedy's widow, Ethel Kennedy, age 94, and 6 of her children had opposed parole for Sirhan. 2 other of Robert and Ethel Kennedy's 9 surviving children, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Douglas Kennedy, were reported by the LA Times to have supported parole for Sirhan last year. Now, Sirhan was sentenced to death in 1969, but his sentence was commuted to life in prison after California banned the death penalty. Outlining his decision to veto parole for Sirhan in an opinion piece in the Los Angeles Times, Newsom said he disagreed with the Board of Parole Hearings' finding that Sirhan was suitable for parole. After carefully reviewing the case, including records in the California State Archives, I have determined that Sirhan has not developed the accountability and insight required to support his safe release into the community, Newsom wrote. Sirhan is currently incarcerated in California's Richard J. Donovan Correctional Facility near San Diego. All right, let us now go to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You're listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Science Quickly, a podcast from Scientific American. I'm Stefano Montali. If I asked you to visualize, say, Harry Potter, you'd probably have no problem picturing him in your mind. A teenage wizard with black hair, glasses, a thunderbolt-shaped scar on his forehead, and a wand in his hand. It would almost be as if you were pulling up a photograph in your head. This ability to visualize is often called the mind's eye, and most people would say it's as inherent as breathing. But it turns out that's not quite true. Estimates say about 1% of the population live with an extreme form of a condition called aphantasia. Those who have it can't visualize anything in their head.
So when they try and imagine, think about what an apple looks like, it's just nothing. It's black on black. For example, when I think about an apple, I can capture a conscious experience of an apple. I can see the stem, I can see a leaf, I can see a drop of water on there. It's not like holding an apple in my hand, but I have an experience of an apple.
Joel Pearson is a professor of cognitive neuroscience and director of the Future Minds Lab at the University of New South Wales in Australia. He's been studying mental imagery, including in the context of aphantasia and cognition, since 2008. One of the main questions, he says, has always been finding a way to accurately measure it.
Back then, almost no one, there was only a few people studying visual imagery because it was so hard to measure, right? It was just questionnaires and maybe an interview. The problem with questionnaires is that you and me could both imagine an apple and our imagery could be exactly the same, but I might rate it a 4 and you might rate it a 1, right? Even though we consciously, internally experience the exact same thing, or vice versa. Maybe we have totally different imagery and both rate it as 2. So that's kind of the inherent problem of metacognition when it comes to questionnaires. So a lot of what we do at Future Minds Lab is trying to develop new ways of measuring the mind, objective, reliable ways, like a microscope for the mind or a blood test to measure the mind.
One of the lab's experiments explored how a lack of mental imagery affects the way people with aphantasia respond in a hypothetical stressful situation.
We did another experiment, which was having people come into a dark room and read these scary stories on the screen. We found that people with imagery, when we measure their skin conductance response, get this nice escalating response during the story. Those with aphantasia get sort of a flatlining, bumpy. Whereas if we show both those group scary images on the screen, both groups go up. So when it's perceptual, no real difference. When it's words on the screen, a role for mental imagery, there's a clear difference.
Building on this research, Pearson and his team then recruited people with aphantasia from the Sydney, Australia area to come to the lab for another experiment. This time, he asked the participants to imagine a dark object and then a light one.
Your pupil contracts when you're imagining the bright thing, just like it does if I look up at the light. People with imagery, the pupil is different in the light condition. No imagery with aphantasia. There's no real difference there.
For a person to be able to volunteer for this type of experiment, they first have to realize that they have aphantasia. But how do you know that you can't visualize if you don't even know that other people can? Quite often, Pearson says the epiphany takes place in a meditation class.
The teacher will be saying, now picture this and picture that, and I'll be getting more and more frustrated saying, they keep saying that, what do they mean? I can't picture that. I compare it to people discovering they're colorblind. They just don't know what they're missing until someone describes somehow the vivid experience of color. Then they go, oh, wait, what?
On a brighter note, though, there are many successful creative people that live with the condition. Pixar co-founder Ed Catmull is one. Glenn Keane, a character animator behind films such as The Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast, is another. So is there a connection between imagery, aphantasia, and creativity?
I had lots of emails from people saying, oh my God, I've realized I have aphantasia. That's why I'm not creative. In fact, we're running a creativity study now here in Future Minds. And again, the data does not support any difference in creativity measures for those with aphantasia. So even though people tend to sort of have some intuition, they think that there should be a lack of creativity in aphantasia, the data just doesn't support that so far.
Living without mental imagery might seem like a disadvantage. But Pearson says there are benefits as well, especially in terms of those living with anxiety disorders such as post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD.
All the data we have so far suggests that the more vivid your imagery is, the more prone you are to develop PTSD after a trauma. Things around anxiety are going to be different and less without imagery.
But what about good memories? Do they stick around? Pearson says yes, just in a bit of a different way.
That can take on a number of different semantics, ideas, concepts, spatial locations, emotions, and sometimes different senses. You can break aphantasia up into multisensory aphantasia, so it's blind across all the senses, or pure visual aphantasia. So why people's lifelong memories have less details if they have aphantasia, they're still there. It's not catastrophic. The memories aren't lost.
Thanks for listening. For Scientific Americans, Science Quickly, I'm Stefano Montali.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. And it doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage. Because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1807. That was the day that President Thomas Jefferson signed legislation outlawing the transatlantic slave trade from bringing enslaved Africans to the United States. At the drafting of the U.S. Constitution, the authors had decided to revisit the question of slavery after 2 decades. During those 2 decades, the dedicated work of abolitionists put pressure on Congress to act against the barbaric transatlantic trade. Abolitionists in Great Britain also passed a law prohibiting the trade that same year. The U.S. law went into effect on January 1st of 1808. When the law was passed, 1 million enslaved people lived in the United States. The act, however, did not release them from bondage. In fact, the western spread of the cotton economy after the Louisiana Purchase ensured that slavery would become even more entrenched. The 1807 Act also did not fully end the transatlantic trade. The law did not include adequate enforcement mechanisms. Historians estimate that illegal smugglers brought in as many as 250,000 more enslaved Africans to the United States after the Prohibition was passed. In 1810, President James Madison spoke to Congress about the problem, saying, "It appears that American citizens are instrumental in carrying on a traffic in enslaved Africans, equally in violation of the laws of humanity and in defiance of those of their own country." It would become more than half a century until the question of slave labor in the United States was finally answered by a bloody civil war. From 1525 to 1866, the best estimates of historians is that 12.5 million Africans were brought to the Americas, and nearly 2 million of them died on the Middle Passage. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon, on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 31 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting a high of only about 35, cloudy early, followed by a mixture of light rain and snow this afternoon. Winds will be light and variable, and it looks like we might have a little bit of piling up of some snow this evening. Cloudy overnight, though, lows in the mid-20s, winds remaining light and variable, and then partly to mostly cloudy tomorrow, highs in the low 40s, winds light and variable, and then we'll be having a snowy mix again beginning tomorrow night and continuing through all of next week. Pollen is still rated none here in the town of Rogue River. The air quality index for the region is in the good range at 34 parts per million, and the daytime UV index is moderate at level 3. Barometric pressure is falling at 30.24 inches. Visibility is up to 10 miles, and relative humidity is at 89%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that crowdsources from around the world. London is 48 degrees and sunny. Paris is 50 degrees and sunny. Rome is 57, partly cloudy with a advisory for thunderstorm activity that could impact critical infrastructure. Kyiv is 41 degrees and fair. Kabul is 42 degrees and fair. Hong Kong is 64 degrees and fair. Tokyo is 42 and clear. Sydney, Australia is 70 degrees and partly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 45 degrees and partly cloudy. And New York, New York is 44 degrees Fahrenheit with heavy fog. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Russ Mitchell of the Los Angeles Times brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. K-drama, K-pop, kimchi, bibimbap, Korean culture in the form of entertainment and food has long taken hold in California and across the U.S. It's time to add Korean cars to the list. Sure, Korean automakers have been selling cars in the U.S. for decades and successfully, though trying to overcome a reputation for low-price, high-value alternatives to Japanese cars. Now, Korean cars are turning cool. Hyundai, Genesis, and Kia, all made by Hyundai Motor Group, have not only achieved parity with the world's top automakers, but also, in some segments, they passed the Japanese, said Jessica Caldwell, auto analyst at Edmunds. Especially notable is the high style and early success of the group's new electric cars. The Ioniq 5 and Ioniq 6 are standouts, Caldwell said. They're doing what Tesla did years ago, turning heads. Tesla remains far out front in electric car sales with 59% market share in the U.S., according to Edmunds. But companies such as Hyundai, with fresher models and new body designs, have Elon Musk looking over his shoulder. When the Hyundai Ioniq 5 and the Kia EV6 compact electric SUVs with base prices around $48,000 debuted a year ago, U.S. sales totaled 37,000 vehicles in the first 3 quarters of 2022. Then, the Inflation Reduction Act, the Biden administration's $369 billion climate bill, put on the brakes. Under the act, only electric vehicles assembled in the U.S. would qualify for a $7,500 customer tax rebate. Bad news not just for Hyundai and Kia, but also for all electric car makers in Japan and Europe. That part of the IRA kicked in immediately when President Biden signed the bill in August. The result? Hyundai, Kia EV sales slowed dramatically, and the Ford Mustang Mach-E retook second place.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Staff at Reuters brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. Britain's Royal Navy said today it had seized Iranian weapons, including anti-tank guided missiles, last month from a smuggler's vessel in international waters in the Gulf of Oman. Britain said the vessel was detected traveling south from Iran at high speed during the hours of darkness by an unmanned U.S. intelligence surveillance and reconnaissance plane and was also tracked by a British helicopter. When hailed by the Royal Navy, the vessel initially attempted to navigate to Iranian territorial waters, but was stopped by a team of Royal Marines who then boarded the small boat and recovered the suspicious packages. Initial inspection suggested the packages included Iranian anti-tank guided missiles and medium-range ballistic missile components, Britain said, adding that it had informed the United Nations about the seizure. It follows two previous Royal Navy seizures of Iranian weapons in the region early last year. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day. But you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. De novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.